Excel 2007 Pivot Reports. There's no denying that your Excel spreadsheets are going to be chocked full of information. You can have up to 1,000,000 rows of data here in Excel 2007. Well, pivot tables can really help you to better analyze your information. It's a different way of laying out your various records so that really in a blink of an eye you can grasp the information that you need to out of that big large spreadsheet. So here we're going to insert a pivot table, modify it. We can even create a pivot table based off of external information, like from a database that you have out there with great pieces of information that you'd like to analyze. Not only can you create pivot tables, but you can also create pivot charts, which are a graphical representation of the data that you're trying to analyze. Pivot tables and charts have been around in Excel for years and years, but of course, here in the 2007 product, the tools are in different locations, so I'll help you navigate that difference if you are used to pivot tables already. I have a spreadsheet already built here with our Sport Shop inventory. What we have are various products. They each have, of course, a price. There's sizes for each product. We have quantities of this in stock, SKUs, colors, and a description in case we want to build some marketing material. If I scroll down, you'll see that I do have lots of different products, lots of different pieces of information. So if I were trying to glean where I have the most quantity or the count of all the different types of batting gloves I have, I'd have to create some formulas. I'd have to really think about this. Maybe I could just simply sort it. But the point I'm trying to get to is it's not really screaming at me anything in particular, except for this is a collection of data. A pivot table is going to help me better analyze my Sport Shop inventory. So the first thing we need to do is find the command. It's here on the Insert ribbon under Pivot Table. If I click this down arrow, I see I could create a pivot table or a pivot chart. I'm going to go for a pivot table. Of course, I could always just click this button here as well. It's already indicating the range of information, but as usual in these dialog boxes, when you click the button with the red arrow, you can go out and select the data. It guessed that I wanted that range based on the fact that I was on this sheet and I had a cell selected within this range. All right, and by the way, I have named this range previously. It's called Pivot Source. That's why it says Pivot Source. If I selected this entire range, it would say the name of the sheet tab, A1 through G82. Either way. Just want to show you, again, Excel indicates, hey, you named your range, let's go with that. That's the easiest way possible. Choose this red arrow saying Pivot Source. Where should I put this? In a new worksheet or just right in this worksheet somewhere else? I'd prefer it in a new worksheet. I'll choose OK. And before I do anything else, I'm going to name this sheet. I'm going to call it Pivot 1. That way, if I bounce back and forth between the sheets, I will know which sheet to click on. Of course, in the real world, you want to give it a descriptive term for why you're creating this pivot table. Now, if any of you are used to pivot tables and older versions of Excel, this may look a little bit different for you. Of course, this is where my pivot table is going to go. This is a placeholder for now, but this is really where my work is to be done. I get to select the fields that I want to display by putting check marks, and then if I want them to be row labels, column labels, what I want to do with the values, and of course if I want to filter anything. So what do I want to look at? Well, product, of course. When I put a check mark in product, I see here it's going to be a row label, and I see it here as a row label. Well, I'd also like to see the sizes. When I click on size, it shows I've got 2 row labels here, and here I see them. Batting gloves, these are all my sizes. When I click this little minus, it will contract the information, so I could just see this very succinctly. I'd also like to take a look at the colors. When I click color, it makes it even more of an outline. So I've got my caps, my sizes, and then my colors. Well, I'd prefer my colors to actually be a column label. Now I've got my row labels here, and I've got my column labels here. What values would I like to see inside there? How about the prices? When I click price, it throws it in the values just because it assumes you're talking numbers, you're done filling in the row labels and column labels area, it's time for the values. Well, let's take a look at this. My baseball caps are $40 a piece, and I have a value in there for the price. For each one of my batting gloves, they're $10 a piece. My grand totals, it added up that each one of the categories for batting gloves I have is $10, so I have the sum of my price is $40. You know, in this context, that really doesn't make sense. Are we really going to be searching for that? Maybe the sum of all the prices in our inventory so we know what our stock is worth, but even there, that's probably not the best use of our pivot table. So I'm going to remove sum of price by just removing that check mark there. Let's take a look at quantity. We're probably more likely going to want to analyze the quantity that we have in stock of each product. So we can see here we've got 305 black baseball caps. We break that down, that's 155 and 150 for our various sizes. So we have these subtotals here in bold. If I scroll over, oh, I don't have to scroll, I see my grand totals. My grand total of adult baseball caps is $698. My grand total of baseball caps total is $1,573. If I scroll down, I can see that I also have grand totals at the bottom. I have 4,972. Remember, this column is just the color black. Black products in my inventory, and so on down the line. I can, of course, rearrange this information. I can drag these items over. I don't know if that makes sense. I can show size and color up here. I've got my colors, adult, child, etc. down the line. I can move my colors over here. So however it makes sense for you to see this information. Let's talk a little bit now about modifying this more, what these little tools are. Let's start in their pivot table field list. You can tell this is really where the bulk of our work is being done. Now here we can change the layout of this field list. I'm going to move this over so you can see field section and arrows stacked. I can have them side by side. I can resize this. Although then you can't see it if I resize it, so I'll resize it back. I think you get the point though. This is just modifying the way that I'm looking at my field list. If I double click on it, it anchors it back here. We're in the pivot table tools ribbon because we have a pivot table selected. If I click outside here, I don't see that pivot table tool information anymore. If I click on this, I get it back. So my point is, we're still talking about this pivot table field list, and here's where I can go also to remove it from view and to bring it back. Remove it from view and bring it back. You might have noticed when I clicked on these items, I got this little down arrow. When I do that, I get a little dialog box here. And at the top of it, I can choose if I want to sort it. I have more sort options that I can go for. You gotta click right on it. I could also choose what I want to filter. Maybe I just want to see the black items that are in stock. All right. And this showed up with my filter. If I want to select all now, I'll choose OK, and they're all back. So these items, it opens up that same dialog box that we get here, report filter. We can also move this if we wanted this to be a row label. Instead of clicking and dragging like I did before, I could also choose to remove the field. If I click on sum of quantity, I get the same shortcut menu. I'll move this over again. The same shortcut menu, but I also have value field settings. If I'm looking at quantity and I'm summing it, maybe I want to count the quantity that I have in stock. Maybe I want to average the quantities. Maybe I want to simply show the values as a difference from or a percentage of. So I have a lot of power here in the way that I'm analyzing the data. If I click number format, I could change it to currency. Of course, that doesn't make sense for quantity, but if I still had prices there, that would make sense. I'm going to cancel this information and double click here to dock it again. The last item in this dialog box is Defer Layout Update. It's going to update when I open this spreadsheet, but I could choose that manually. I want to update it, that I don't want it to change until I go into my field list and choose Update. Because maybe I went into here and I made some modifications, but I'm not yet ready for my pivot table to update with that information. Let's go on back into the options area. We have a pivot table here, and I could go into the options overall. This will open up a dialog box, and I can really get down into details. Do I want to change the layout and the format? Do I want to not show my grand totals? Do I want to display information differently, like I don't want these minus and plus signs? What about printing? When I print this, do I want to have the buttons? Maybe not. So that's why it's not checked. Most people wouldn't want to. What about the data? Do I want all this source information stored with the file? It makes for better efficiency when you're using this spreadsheet because all the data will be collected together and it doesn't have to do some sort of call out to another file. I think you get the point of my pivot table options. I'll choose OK. And I took away those grand totals. If I want to get them back, I of course can go back into the options, but they're also on this design ribbon here under grand totals. I have lots of choices. I could choose it on for rows and columns, or maybe just for rows or just for columns. There's also the subtotals command as well that took away my subtotals. I kind of like the subtotals. Maybe I want them at the bottom of the group though, instead of at the top of the group. Let's go back to the options part. Active field. Well, what do I have selected there? Let me choose a product and go into active field. It's showing my active field as being product. I can go into the field settings here for this. Right now, it's automatic for subtotals and filters. Maybe I would like a custom subtotal. Would I like to see the count of my products? I'll go ahead and choose OK. And now what I'm seeing is my baseball cap. I've got a count of 2 for black. Adult and child. I've just got 2 different types of baseball caps there. I can go back into active field. I want to make sure I have active field selected. Field settings. I can go back to automatic. Choose OK. Here we have the group selection and ungroup. These are considered groupings. I can work with the outline version of this if I'd like to. Of course, I can sort and filter depending on what I have selected. In this group, I could sort by ascending order. Whoops. That's now sorting all of my sizes by ascending order instead of descending order. If I click on products, now I can sort these by ascending or descending order. Or of course I can get more detailed. If I need to refresh my data, change my data source, that would be fine. I can also clear my pivot table, any actions that I'd taken. I can also select the entire pivot table. Maybe I just want to select my labels and values. I can even move my table to a new worksheet. If this is something that I'd like to deal with in another area, that might be the best choice. I'll click cancel there. We'll come back to our pivot table. Formulas allow you to make adjustments. You could actually create a new calculated field. If this just wasn't doing it for you and you wanted to multiply your price times your quantity, for example, you could certainly do that here. Let's move on to the design ribbon now. We've talked about these 2 items in the layout, the subtotals and grand totals. If we look at report layout, we have some choices. We're in compact form. If we choose outline form, now it's moved our sizes over into a different area. That might be an easier way to look at it. I'll contrast that back to compact. We can also show it in a tabular form if you prefer this layout. Same data, just different ways of displaying it. If you want to make it even easier on the eyes, you can add a blank line that will go after every one of these main labels. And I can also remove that. If I don't want to see row headers, I can remove the row headers. Same with column headers. If I click there, it makes it easier to see. Just removes the color. Banded rows. Sometimes that's an easier way to print. It allows things to pop out versus banded columns. That might be the way to go. And of course, you can change the styles. As I roll over it, it gives you an idea of what it's going to look like. Ooh, how about that? Not bad, huh? Keep in mind, of course, you're in the context of Excel, so you can do anything you want on any of these other ribbons. But these pivot table tools are meant really to focus in on your pivot tables. I like what we've done so far. I'm going to click the Save button. Let's go ahead and create another pivot table. I'm going to go to a new fresh sheet. Make sure I'm in my Insert ribbon, choose Pivot Table. This time, I'm going to grab information from an external data source. I have an Access query that has data that I'd like to view as a pivot table. I'll choose the connection because really that's the only thing that I can do. I already have this connection in here. It's my food orders complete. I'm going to go ahead and select that and choose Open. This looks good to me. Where do I want this? In the existing worksheet? Sheet 3, starting in cell A1? That would be fine with me. Okay, so here again, same creation, but now my data source is located in a different file. Here are all the fields from my external data source. My external data source has to do with food orders that I have for my zoo. So, what would I like to see in here? I'd like to see the name of the food that I order. I'd like to see the company that I order that from. In fact, I'd like to have let's move this out here so I can have a little bit more real estate space. I'd like to see my company at the top. I'd like to see the order date. In fact, I'd like to see the order date for the company. I'd like to see the quantity here. Maybe I'd like to see the price. I've got a lot of information going on here. All right, I'm going to double click on this to dock it back over there. In fact, actually, I'm going to close it so we have more space. Okay. A lot of information. I've got all my orders for the Cattle Rancher outlet. Here's my bananas. Those are the quantities that I have on hand. Where did I order them from? All right. Mostly from farm produce. There's my total bananas from farm produce. So I can scroll on down. I'm not really liking this layout of information. Let's bring the field list back and remove the price. I'm going to put quantity over here. And now I can see a little bit better. Here are my orders for Cattle Rancher outlet. Probably steak is more likely going to come from the Cattle Rancher outlet instead of bananas. So what do I have? The sum of all my quantities on my orders. And then overall, my total, I've ordered 207 steaks or orders of steak, however many I order from my zoo, from the Cattle Ranchers outlet. That's a little bit too hard to read. I can remove the order date here, and now I'm just looking at numbers. So hopefully you get the idea of how I can really analyze my information in a better manner. Maybe I want to change this to show up as currency. All right. Okay, so we used data from an external source. We used data from a worksheet that existed in the same spreadsheet. We really have to have a plan beforehand of why we'd want to use a pivot table, and then we just take some time to move items around. Let's now create a chart. I'll go back to my Insert ribbon, and I'll choose the command Pivot Chart. What range would I like? I'm going to go back to my pivot, to my inventory. Now I could select, by the way, I could just type in the name of that range. I have to spell it correctly though. Pivot source. I'll choose OK. I could have just typed it in here as well. I'd like this chart to go into a new worksheet. I'll choose OK. I'm starting from scratch. It is going to have a pivot table behind the scenes. Here's my chart that is going to be built. I'll move this so we can see it a little bit. I've got my pivot chart filter pane. I'm going to close this for now so we have more real estate. I'm going to start from scratch. I'd like to see the product, and I'd like to see the sizes. I'd also like to see the quantities. Now we're getting somewhere. All right, so it's a little bit muddled together there. So if we put size in the legend fields, now we see all of our products, and we see our sizes are based off of color. So for this baseball cap, I can zoom in a little bit so we can see it. Ooh, that was a little much, wasn't it? How about, well, how about just a little bit more? Okay, so baseball cap, we've got 2 entries. I could change the type of chart that I have. I'm in my pivot chart tools. I've got now 4 new tabs. If I go to change chart type, I can change and make this stacked. Now instead of multiple bars, I don't see the prices either. I see the percentage that these sizes are of our total golf shirt classic, for example. I can figure out that almost 30% of my golf shirt microfiber are the large entries there. What if I'd like to also see the color involved in that? Okay, so that bumped color down here, but I could bump color over here. And now in my legend, I have even more information. I've got my extra large in white, my extra large in red, my extra large in blue. And of course, again, that's the percentage of the quantity that I have in stock. So I have lots of different types of golf shorts. I offer lots of that, but my baseballs, I really only offer one item. So 100% of my baseballs are not applicable. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? I, of course, have all the tools that I had available before. I do have my pivot table behind the scenes that I could work with. I could do some filtering, and I have all of these chart tools available to me. I could go back and select different data. I could go to a quick layout. Maybe I'd like to see built into this chart the actual data sheet as well. You need a lot of real estate to have that displayed. But maybe I'd like to see it just in a different layout, a different manner. I could change my styles. My color coding could be way different. Wow, that looks almost like candy, like hard candy. That looks yummy. I can go to my layout and I can change all these items. Do I want to see the legend at the left instead of at the right? What about the titles to my axes? Do I want to have a title down here that's called perhaps products? What about my overall chart title? Maybe I want to put one in here that's called pivot table, or the date, or something like that. And that, of course, is in the way, so I'm going to choose none. I don't want to mess up any information. I can change the format for my various selections. If I select all of my labels at the bottom and choose Format Selection, I can change all of these various items. I'm going to choose Close there. I don't want to really mess with this chart too much. We have a whole other nugget on how you can work with charts. I just want to show you that you still have all of these chart tools available to you when you insert a chart. This was the field list that we were working with all along. We also have the pivot chart filter. Maybe I'd like to only see my baseball caps and my baseball gloves. If I choose OK, now I get to pinpoint exactly what it is that I'm after. I could go back and choose Select All there and choose OK. My legend fields, maybe I want to sort and only see my extra large information. All right, I've got a large amount of extra large batting gloves there, and a lot of tennis shorts there that are extra large as well. So extra large white, extra large blue is what I have a lot of. If I go back here, I can choose select all as well. In this example, we made a pivot chart from scratch. But you could also base a pivot chart off of a table that you had already created. You make sure you have a cell selected within the table, and then you go into your options area and choose pivot chart. From here I could choose this stacked chart again, which by the way is the default that Excel likes to give you. It's kind of messy again, so we could go back and do all the various items that we had done before. We could rearrange the fields and make changes. We could go back to Analyze again and choose our field list, and maybe we don't want to see all this information. Of course, everything that we did before is the same thing that we can do now. It's just going to take a while for me to get it back exactly like how it was. I'm going to click the close on this. If you did create a chart and it was here and you didn't want to keep it, you could always move it by going back to the Design tab, choosing Move Chart, and throw this into a new sheet within this same worksheet. There's Pivot Chart 1, Pivot Chart 2. No doubt about it, this one looks a little bit better. I could spend some time and modify this and have it look more pleasing to the eyes and really actually understandable. Wouldn't that be rude to print that out and give it to my audience? All right, so pivot charts, pretty cool. You have your data source. You grab your command from the insert ribbon. You can throw it in the same sheet, on a different sheet. When you have it selected, you've got more tools available to you than what you do when you're normally in Excel. It's a separate object, it's dynamic, it can be updated when your source data is updated. And of course, if you want to go that extra step and make a pivot chart, that just might be the best way to explain your information to an audience. We really did quite a bit here. Let's review. The first thing we did, of course, was we inserted a pivot table from scratch. It was a great way to analyze our sport inventory. We modified it using the different commands that are evident on the ribbons. We even brought in some information from an Access database. And of course, we weren't complete until we had a graphical representation of our pivot table. We created a pivot chart pretty easily. It's easy to create all of these pieces of information. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.